Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Big Data, Spatial Analytics, and Geo Dashboards. Today, I will be your host. My name is Ryan Goodman. I am the co-founder of CMaps Analytics. We develop cloud-based location intelligence solutions that provide us with the ability to embed mapping capabilities directly within business intelligence applications. So today, I am extremely lucky to have with us Neil Ubeline, who is the founder of nVision Group. And his story, his organization's journey, the kind of customer analytics solutions that these guys build are just absolutely amazing. It's a story that had to be shared. And we're fortunate to have him with us today to not only share the journey, but also share live with you guys some of the geo dashboard solutions that they've created for some of their Fortune 100 clients, and also explain how you go from visualization to location analytics, and certainly some of the technologies, lessons learned, and benefits of using location intelligence are evident in that story. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Neil, who will introduce himself and take you guys for a ride through his location analytics solutions.
Thanks, Ryan. First of all, just thanks for inviting us out and the kind introduction. To give you a sense of the length of our journey, it goes back to where nVision was founded about 12 years ago in 2004. And our background, as you can see throughout the screen, is centered around finance and financial planning and analysis. And as part of that, we've been involved with performance management within corporate groups over time. Our origin, our center of gravity is corporate real estate, but through that, because real estate touches so many different aspects of companies, we've wound up working with large network organizations, HR organizations, obviously corporate finance, which is our initial roots. And through that time, we've moved from an advisory company where we just basically provided consulting services to certainly more of a technology company with our own hosted platform, which we're going to show you pieces of today. My own personal background and experience is everything from Navy nuclear power submarines through my training academically is in finance and investments, and the early part of my career was on the owner commercial side of real estate. But going all the way back in around 2000, I had the opportunity to go in and run the real estate finance function for Sprint, and got to see firsthand a company that at the time moved about $1 billion of cash each year out of Sprint into the hands of various owners and landlords and contractors doing work. And one of the observations that was surprising coming into the corporate setting was how many decisions are made by people that are not necessarily trained in analytics or trained in finance. And so that's something that we look through. I had an opportunity during my time at Sprint to work directly for the chief financial officer, which allowed another view of how executives want to see data. And then lastly, while on the corporate real estate side of Sprint, had a chance and opportunity to co-chair the technology steering committee and became more and more curious about how technologies could impact the world of planning. Today, what we want to do is show, as Ryan said, how we use location intelligence in the work we do for major corporate clients. Our clients include into the Fortune 10, Fortune 100. We deal with a lot of large organizations that have very complex real estate portfolios. We want to show you how we use location intelligence in mapping. Want to highlight some of the key partner relationships and platform capabilities. There's a number of vendors out there that offer capabilities in the space. I want to show you why we make some of the choices we made or how we deploy that, and how it might be mimicked across any particular vendor landscape. Through that, we'll discuss best practices and lessons learned. We spent a lot of late nights figuring out how to get the complex data relationships our clients have up through and into working dashboards and BI type tools. The approach we're going to use, and we'll touch on each of these as we go through, but briefly, what we'll do is kind of move through over time how our own capabilities have emerged and the choices we made around investing in our platform, as they were driven in the first three instances at the bottom of your screen. First, the need for interactive visualizations. The whole concept of BI largely is bringing things together and creating these compelling views. We'll show you how we got started in there. And then over time, the need to increase the scale of data that we could look at, need to improve our own reporting output because of bottlenecks we were encountering. And then lastly, we're going to touch on our relationship. We've had about 7 years with Alteryx, but most recently moving over to server-based deployment of Alteryx and some of the self-service analytics that come out of that, where it's not driven by customer needs, but we're realizing those capabilities going into our own customer base is completely changes the way they can approach decision support and planning within their organizations. So within that, the first stage, and if you notice the date, I don't want to take you too far back in time. We actually still use this capability. You can see that we initially used it, and it was our first relationship with Brian and Senegon was back in 2007, 2008. We used the predecessor of SAP Dashboards, the Excelsius product, because we were analysts working in Excel, and we weren't real fond of the charting options and the delivery options of Excel, and so we wound up coming on to Excelsius and realized there were pieces of it missing because real estate's all about location, and so we wound up building dashboards that would allow us to take commute data or commute information around these companies that move employees a great deal and create dashboards. So this first capability that I want to show you is simply a commute dashboard that represents, in this case, 323 associates that work in a particular building, in this case, the Orlando area. It could be filtered down to individual groups within the organization. I'll go ahead and look at all departments, but we frequently get situations where corporate clients want to look at the impact of moving a group from their current building, either by a specific organization or by a type of worker, whether they're a part-time worker, full-time. And we wind up taking a data, basically a list of employees. We do use Alteryx underneath, and we create various views, such as if you move these employees from this location further south in Orlando to the northern part, what would be the impact employee by employee and group by group? And so we prepare actually a number of these each year for clients. And I would say coming into, and maybe even as late as last year, even though this capability originally was developed in 2007, 2008, from within our client base, this was still considered a best-in-class practice, because in the alternate, they take those individuals and move them through geocode, create them in separate dashboards, and then wind up most times with maps or pictures, static pictures that weren't drillable, or you could segment into individual groups, and they would wind up using those for internal decision support. Why? Because most times the real estate group may want to close a building or relocate or move people around to accommodate space needs. And the impacted group, particularly the people living down here to the south that are going to be negatively impacted by this significant relocation, obviously are going to put forward some resistance. So the real estate group is better served knowing which groups and which individuals are going to be impacted adversely by a move before it occurs. In traditional kind of SAP dashboard form, the ability to show information either in charting or within a map. And this is where, going way back, we really first got involved with Ryan, was the need to show and communicate what can be said in a chart, but much more greatly appreciated in a map. And that's when we first began this relationship back in 2008. And actually, we still do these today, but I'd say going up into late last year within our clients, like I said, this was still considered best-in-class practice. And we're going to show you how that's evolved coming into this year later in this webinar.
Yeah, so obviously dashboards and data visualization for many companies is still, critical, right? As the importance of visualization has exploded over the last 5 years. So you said 2008. Since then, has anything really changed as far as the demands for maps or data visualization?
I see it more now where people are accustomed to seeing information visually and interpreting, just as the industry has moved and more tools are out there. Certainly when you look across the vendor population that does dashboarding, the recognition that maps are intrinsic to location and just the ability to analyze location information is greatly increased. And then also the ability to put maps in. And I look at your own success with the various different platforms now that you can embed CMaps in. It's just a recognition by those vendors that have platform capabilities that mapping needs to be intrinsic to that. And I do think you see that with, like, we were fortunate, we started early in the kind of the BI space, and then we've watched now over the past few years just the upsurge in the last 5 years.
Yeah, and this is a great starting point too. Obviously, you come from a finance background, right? So in your own journey in analytics and business intelligence, you were focused on the business and have moved into a technology consulting role. And so this is a great starting point in that journey. And certainly, I've already seen what you have next. So this is fantastic.
And I think that to that point, one of the things when you look at, and you notice in the slides, we go back to the presentation and quotes is technology, because wrapping, those who are familiar with the SAP dashboards, when you simply use it with embedded spreadsheets, it's a little bit generous to call it a technology in the sense that you're basically just wrapping a really dynamic charting solution around what essentially is a spreadsheet. We were, let's say being analysts in the background, we were skilled at spreadsheets going early on. So what happened over time, though, and I mentioned the type of clients we work with, is that when you use an embedded spreadsheet in SAP dashboards, you're limited to a few thousand rows of data, and as much as you can game it and find ways to scale it, you're still down to the fact that you're working in a fairly modest arrangement of columns and rows that has very little data moving through it. And so what happened over time as we got into 2010, and I'll show you a use case in a moment, where we literally sat down with a client that was looking at a portfolio of assets that they have across the continental U.S., where they had, I think at the time, a couple thousand assets, and literally had a spreadsheet with columns A through G or H, and the final column was a comment section where they were making notes about things they might do with the garage or things that they might do with this particular portfolio. Was service centers where they held trucks that went out to customers throughout the day, and it's a large company. They had 2,000 of these garages. What happened is they started talking to us. We thought, well, 2,000 garages isn't bad, but actually to analyze those fully, you need to start understanding more about what those technicians and trucks and everything's doing. And so at the end of the day, this kind of second stage that we went through was that we hit these real world problems that are corporate clients, and it had much larger data sets. So what happened on our end is probably the most significant upgrading capabilities for us is that in the 2010-2011 window, we decided rather than do simple dashboards wrapped around spreadsheets that we would go to the other end of the spectrum and go to full scale. And we embarked on the deployment of actually licensing and deploying our own SAP Enterprise instance and having our own BI platform and our own hosted servers. And so we used it for traditional query reporting, analysis, data export, generation of web intelligence reports, things like that. Also for user management, folders, permissions, everything down in that line. But the other key part of that was we still didn't have a way to, at scale, bring data up from databases where we were going to bring those into our server environment up into dashboards and working dashboards. And that's where we first began a relationship. It's been a very successful relationship over the last 5 or 6 years with Antivia. And what their product at the time, they had a kind of a middleware that connected from databases or through Webby reports up into dashboards, the product XWiz Advantage, and it gave us flexible, scalable connections to these underlying databases, and it really changed the scale at which we can operate. And so when we sat with the group and they described 2,000 garages, I would tell you over here that those I list as the sites, we began literally on a whiteboard diagramming out what kind of business capabilities. To Ryan's point, we began as business analysts, not technology centered individuals. So we mapped out what would you like to do, and we realized that a more complete picture of what was going on or the decisions that you'd make about the garages, because your real estate group would really involve where do the trucks go, where within an individual city or market are they going to visit. And we began building a data model that involved customer addresses in the upper right. It involved the work tickets that would be originated under service orders there, that someone ordered a new service, had an install, had a repair. Obviously, those were conducted by technicians in the tens of thousands for the technicians for this particular company. They were organized in various different internal organizations and departments. And we began getting into situations where now we were taking down from that customer tens of millions of records of customer addresses and service orders. And to manage it, this was really kind of predating a lot of the big data capabilities that are out there. And so we had to be somewhat clever in finding ways to aggregate the data, bring it down. And so we began a system of, because we weren't doing the actual dispatch function or the routing of the trucks, that we didn't need to operate at that level of detail. We needed to analyze where garages were in proximity to the work they were doing. We began grouping them into these 1 mile by 1 mile grids across the continental U.S. to the extent that we actually had work occurring in about 250,000 different of these 1 mile by 1 mile grids. So again, this bigger data set. What we looked at then was the fact that we had to calculate distances from all of these garages to any grid that was reasonably close by, because we didn't want to just know what was happening with the current dispatch pattern. We wanted to know, for closed real estate, where else could you do work from? And so we got into this problem of, we can't really calculate as powerful a tool as Alteryx was, and at the time we were a desktop licensee of Alteryx. We can't really pass back real-time distance calculations in this era. So we began pre-calculating distances, pre-calculating some of the alternate route arrangements, and with this pre-processing, what we were able to do was create really kind of a reporting tables. It was almost a data warehouse of sorts, where we would take all of that data. We knew eventually how the end user, we spent a lot of time on the end user dashboard experience and what queries would be needed and how much they'd have to move. And we wound up then being able to deliver dashboards where it could be across, frankly, hundreds of markets is what ultimately got modeled. A user could pick an individual market, come in and look and view within selecting assets within it, and bringing back small amounts of data that allowed dashboards to perform using technologies, frankly, that existed 4 or 5, 6 years ago. And go and take a look at that. This is, and I've moved this, I may ruin the credibility of my presentation by telling everyone that I was raised in Southeast Missouri, and I'll give you a look at it. We've taken some data and just modeled it down to be able to show the capability without compromising the client information. So we've kind of slid a very extensive garage portfolio down to my hometown of Poplar Bluff, Missouri, just to protect the innocent. And when you look at it, basically this capability, now bear in mind, this began with sitting in a room with a group that had a spreadsheet of a couple thousand assets listed, and it grew into this particular capability. And what now this organization is able to do is to pull a portfolio of garages that are coded here and colored by which group is in. They can see basic information about the garage. They can see the distance from that garage to its destinations, similar to the commute diagram. They can come in and look at historical staffing and also the history of demand of how much work has been done from this particular asset or site or garage. And then the other thing, because we have information on each and every other one, they can actually look at garages that alternate around it. You can see as I move around, the garage changes, but also the historical staffing of the alternate site, because they're always looking for consolidation or technician transfer opportunities. And visually, when you start to see it, you get a much better sense. Well, the historical staffing at this site is at or near its peak. And if I turn this selection off, I can come back and say, as opposed to, in this case, this garage currently has 37 technicians, and at one point had a peak of 45, so it has a little bit of capacity. Where the Ryan and Senegon, where their capabilities become instrumental in this, is that we actually, in the background, we had those millions of customer destinations. And so what we've done in that sense has been able to come back, look at this and say, I don't want to bog down someone that just wants to come in and see historical staffing with actually a view of where the work's done. So we just basically configure the dashboard to say there may be times where an individual wants to come in. And you see this now with this pause is basically a data fetch going back and saying, I've been asked now for the demand profile, or where is the work occurring. And here you see these 1 mile by 1 mile grids demonstrated, the darker blues within 5 or 10 drive miles of that particular garage, and then it fades in the lighter blues 10 to 20, and then gray out there, it's a greater than 20 mile drive. And then if you look at it, we've used some of the Senegon tools. If you haven't seen these are just very, very well received by our client. If we want to look, for example, the work that's occurring off here to the east, as though we're thinking about relocating, we may have an unusual service area. You can draw radial distance. Those of you familiar with these tools draw radial distance. We tend to draw these odd shapes because of natural boundaries, etc. And we can come in and look and go that there were 22,000 annual destinations for this. The area I've highlighted represents about half, a little over half, 51% of those destinations, and it's the equivalent work of about 14 technicians that are doing work in that area. So this ability to create from what was initially a spreadsheet to reach out into multiple organizations, HR data for staffing history, the actual network and truck data for where trucks actually go from a GPS point of view, bring that in under that data model we described a moment ago, and create a meaningful visual experience that allows individuals to see this. And lastly, what we realized on this particular capability is that as we watched the behavior of our end user clients, we realized that they were looking across these thousands of assets and all of these different alternates that you see. Again and again, they were looking for where's an asset that has a certain level of staffing that could be housed in another asset, so we have a consolidation opportunity to reduce our expenses. They looked for adjacent sites where there that was also close to the work, and we saw almost half the work was off here to the east, so these sites become candidates. And then they also wanted to know, this garage itself has its own footprint. They preferred sites where that garage was already active and covering the same areas. And we realized as we watched them do this again and again that in the background we could actually write the scripts back in the database to auto score the portfolio, and rather than look at the 20,000 possible combinations of relocation, we could bring forth to them, here's 100 that are most attractive based on the ability to absorb the technicians, the proximity to the work that's being done. For example, if I were to pick this asset and look at distances, we can tell them that specifically you would have to drive about 20,000 miles a year more to cover that if you did it from this alternate garage as opposed to the one where you did the work in the prior year. So the ability to take that and automate those tasks just by watching the behavior of how people use the dashboards and realize that they were doing the same thing over and over again. And we have an opportunity in the back end to auto score that and bring to them the best opportunities rather than treat all 20,000 potential relocations as beginning at an equivalent stage.
And the one thing that strikes me every time you share this particular demo with us is that in this particular case, the map itself obviously is used to view the garage sites the map is also used as an input tool, right, as an analysis tool in itself. And the other thing that strikes me is that in using the map as the tool, the aha moment, right, where the business users reach their thought plateau isn't necessarily the map, right? It's the scoring, it's the analysis that you're doing as a result of the user interacting with the map or with the dashboard that the user is deriving their value from. Can you tell me a little bit about the scoring aspect of it, like how transformational that was, as opposed to just giving them data, giving them a visual of the data?
And this is one, and I know you've got a guest coming up soon that talks about, adoption's the metric that truly matters, and I'll let you speak to your coming presentation and your partner in that regard. But it's true. The most clever dashboard I thought we ever built, we had a hard time getting traction and use out of it. So we went and actually pulled the executives and started talking through. Can we get more executive mandate? But what we realized in the end was the actual display of information, just starting with all of this capability rolled out. There was a lot of training that, in essence, it was a bit intimidating because the ability to delineate, if I start in and look, the most curious would go in and search things out, but others would go in and be not quite sure where to start. And we sat down and really mapped out that process and narrowed it down to what is most important to you when you're considering garage closures or potential transfers. And they looked at those distance impacts and that, and we realized in the back end, when you're doing the same thing over and over again and what you're processing mentally, we can come back with scripts in the background and score. And I don't have it populated in this case, but you could actually come in and they could actually pop up and list, if not in this demo environment, but they could see which garage was a disposition candidate, how many technicians were there, what alternative garage could be, how much availability, and they could specifically navigate to that. So they didn't have to go in and just search a needle through a haystack. They literally were shown these are opportunities. They still had to be vetted and validated in the field, but it really narrowed down 20,000 possibilities down into the top 100, 200, 300 that 16 different people were tasked with going and researching. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, that highlights everything that we talk about in webinars and collaterals and all the blogging and things that we do, is that it really is about getting business users as close as possible to the answers to the questions they have, as opposed to providing them with a tool to hunt and peck and try to find it on their own. So that's fantastic.
Right. So as we move through, right, we're still back several years, although that capability certainly evolved. We first introduced it, so with the platform investment in 2010, 2011. It's evolved over the last several years. Another thing we did in 2012-13 was, because corporate real estate lacked planning tools, we actually built our own web-based planning application because it's very unique to corporate real estate group. So I won't show you that other than to say that it's a complete supply-demand modeling tool for real estate. And the issue that we ran into is that because we're now off in developing web applications, everything involved with user interface and data structures and the stored procedures in the background to create a full-blown, robust application. The other side was reporting, and we were seeing these bottlenecks and cost barriers because anytime we wanted to change the reporting side, we had programmers, developers in creating a new set of reports, and it took a while to dawn on us that we have all this BI capability. We should really just be our own service provider and come in, and we began to look at using those types of tools. And what we wanted to do is get away from expensive build costs, and so we were really looking for something that had high build speed, could allow us to just accelerate the development timeline, allow us to test things out, whether we really should make a particular UI change. And at that time, Antivia, who'd already had the relationship through the middleware, actually was Advantage type capability, we wound up becoming a very early adopter of their DecisionPoint dashboard capability. And we actually looked at a number of different dashboarding tools, and DecisionPoint really won out, and I can't tell you enough my respect for the folks at Antivia. I believe they're among the most clever people in this industry when you get a chance to visit with them and listen to their roadmap and where they're going. But what we were able to do, because of the way DecisionPoint is structured, now we use the enterprise version where you connect to databases in the back end. They actually have a version, oddly enough, or not coincidentally, it's very intentional on their part. They've taken their those great capabilities and built it now so that, like the first dashboard I showed you, that you can cost effectively wrap interactivity around Excel. They've got DecisionPoint for Excel, so they actually have that same functionality. Like I said, it's intentional, not coincidental, that they're out there realizing just how popular that level of charting is around existing Excel models. In our case, we went for the enterprise. We looked at the build speeds. I'll show you a quick example of their tools, and then I want to move in, as we close, I want to move in and show you another great partner of ours is Alteryx, and what, by moving to their server version, we're able to do. But the last note, I feel like I should explain, Antivia is a UK-based company, and now that you've had to see a map of Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and listen to a still, at my age, a slight southern Missouri drawl, if you want to detox from that, I'd suggest you go over to Antivia.com and listen to one of their resource videos, and you'll get a much classier accent. It's just best in class, and my kids enjoy when they walk in my office and they see and get a chance to listen to them. But to get a quick view, rather than just talk about the capabilities, I'm going to log in and we'll come in and look at a demo real quick of, again, I think part of the theme here is how to use maps. This is actually output reporting, if I'm not logged out. This is actually, I'm going to have to come back and log back in. I think I've got an idle session. In this case, we're trying to communicate portfolio actions. Bear in mind, we do real estate planning, and so we build different scenarios of keeping every building, or perhaps getting out of buildings. We may do this for a different market like San Francisco, and this allowed us to get a view of the portfolio. And here you can see basically within this DecisionPoint dashboard the reduction of seats. It could be area or any other measure. Down here we've got the area listed. You can see specifically the sites that are going to be vacated. Because it's a real estate world, when you look at DecisionPoint, we have a chance to organizationally come in and look at the organizations, who has headcount in that market, who's impacted by different building decisions. Like I said, the ability again to connect and create and show in a map. Now, my standing joke, since this is demo data, is that these are buildings that they're getting out of, and it's not normal practice for corporate real estate groups to conduct arson or eliminate portfolios. We actually were playing around with Synagon's icon abilities and had settled on fire and red for disposition properties, and it actually wound up making its way and staying in the demo database. The customer version of these doesn't suggest that any arson is going on in terms of fire, but this this gives you a sense. And then with DecisionPoint, like I said, the ability to build kind of an application look and feel where we can come in and change weightings on various metrics that score the opportunity of a different garage, the ability to see who's disrupted, etc. Again, just and if you notice the framing in this actually was built, and we had it framed specifically for iPad. So while mobility, because our users are typically browser-based, mobility didn't drive us in a lot of our platform investment. We benefited from the fact when we adopted the DecisionPoint platform that everything was in HTML5, and we immediately were over off of Flash-based dashboards and into mobile development tools, and in that regard.
Has the ability to create content for mobile, be able to kind of design once, deploy anywhere, has that changed the discussion with the customers? Having the ability to use this stuff on the iPad, is that changing any of the design decisions that you're making?
Yeah, for us, what we're starting to see, because like the first working tool, the Work Center Garage one, is such a planner, manager sitting at their desk, really looking at it and really diving into information. It wasn't so much an issue. But in our own audiences, as we go higher in the chain, right? Analysts tend to still have laptop devices. When you start looking at corporate buying, right, a lot of our customer base on the executive side now is carrying different devices, tablets, different types of iPads, where they're largely either consuming information, checking emails, responding, and so portability much more important to them than maybe the full functionality or tactile keyboard of a laptop, et cetera. So we're seeing a change in the devices that users carry, and obviously the other thing for us is a big return to being on the go for meetings, being away from your primary work location. For us, it's not unusual for an executive to sit back and say, I'm going to go and present on the real estate side. I'm going to go present to a business unit executive. I'd like to know the portfolio they have through the lens of that executive. So being able to get on their phone, get on an iPad on the way to a meeting, on the train or in a cab, and literally pull up and see, here's the real estate world from our corporate view through the lens of a specific executive, and say, you may have a lot of people in Atlanta or you may have a lot of people in London, but we don't really care about that because we're not dealing and we're not doing anything with the buildings. But you also have some people in San Francisco, and it looks like we're about to burn some of those buildings down. If you saw the earlier part of the webinar and the icons, right? We're getting out of these buildings, and you're going to be impacted, and it's maybe the technology organization, whoever it is. So they know specifically how to retrieve that information in very purpose-built dashboards. And that's one of the things, to close that thought, we very much focus on when we're designing dashboards. One of the checklists we have right at the very beginning is this an analyst user? Is it an executive user? And how do we get executives proficient in BI? There was a survey at businessintelligence.com some time ago of 75% of the content is on our website. 75% of the content executives receives in paper, email, or spreadsheets, or PowerPoint type static presentations, and they prefer 75% to be coming in the form of dashboards or within applications. So you now have an executive population that wants to consume information. The other thing we try to walk clients through is understand that if you put a lot of capability out, begin with guided presentations. You're there with showing and taking advantage of the interactivity to have a live collaborative session, then narrowly purpose and introduce kind of an agile frame, very narrowly purposed dashboards that are self-service for the end user, and then begin to expand that so that then that executive may be actually a consumer of dashboards and proficient, but don't throw the most complex dashboard out at first. Give an end user that's removed from the data ability to use it and expect success on the adoption side. So that's just another thing we kind of walk through, think about the device that's going to be used, the setting, is it going to be a guided presentation or self-service consumed, and then start building from that. That's as important as layout in our mind. So,
yep, goes back to that. Your number one metric if you're building dashboards or you're creating content, regardless of the tool, your number one metric as a dashboard designer is user adoption. Because if no one's using it, then it doesn't matter how great it is.
Yeah, and I'm going to close here with. I started to show a commute tool. I'm just going to pull up a basic spreadsheet, and I want to show you in this last capability as we bring this to a close. This last capability to me is, in 2011, we deployed our own platform and servers and SAP BI and enterprise-grade tools for the first time. That was a fundamental change in our company. Really coming into this year, we've made a similar jump in capabilities in that we moved from a 6 or 7 year relationship with Alteryx, where we're using desktop versions to calculate all those distances you saw evident in all of the map-based tools that we've shown you. But we've moved over to, like many others, moved over to Alteryx Server. And we moved so far then as to also become an Alteryx partner in that process, because I have, going back 20 years professionally in the finance investments world, certainly 16 years on the corporate side of working with corporations and how they make decisions and everything. I have never seen a change in, we always struggled with individuals making economic impacting decisions that weren't skilled at finance or trained necessarily in that type of decision making. I had an opportunity to teach a corporate real estate finance course for a large trade organization, probably 1,500 students over the last decade. and we're trying to give them finance skills. But the way we in the past designed teams was to put a financial analyst close to all these individuals that were making economic decisions. In reality, the first dashboard I showed you was one where an individual had identified people they wanted to move and relocate. The 323 people that are going to be impacted by a move, they would provide us with a list of those people and where the buildings that they might move to. We would process that and turn it around, oftentimes the same day, sometimes a day or two later. And these individuals were thrilled with that. Now, what I want to show you is that in this new era of self-service analytics, we were considered up until last year probably best in class at our ability to turn interactive dashboards around and create these embedded spreadsheets or connect them to our database in connected spreadsheets. But our ability to take that through a series of manual handoffs. What happened over time, if you look at this final stage, we actually asked this of clients and prospective clients, is how long would it take you to get from that spreadsheet you see to the left to, even with other vendors, just a static picture, PowerPoint presentation of the impact of commute. And we've actually, when you look at the choices down below, is it 2 weeks, 1 week, 2 days, 2 hours, 90% of the time, it's often either A or B. And there's an expectation once you do something manually, and that's how many people are involved for getting into the process. When you do this manually, there's an expectation that it's going to take you a week. There's almost apologetic. Is there any chance I could get this tomorrow for a meeting? That's what is built into the culture in terms of the time allowed for analysis. If you look at when I talk about a changing technology, let's say we deployed Alteryx, and we're so enamored with this capability that we went further and became an actual partner. Let me show you as a replacement for that initial dashboard. We've built, instead of dedicating a financial analyst, we basically built an analytics workflow where our skills are spent building solutions that sit on the Alteryx platform. And in this case, I'm going to run this work from home. It's a Dallas population. I have that spreadsheet that I've modeled previously. This is the spreadsheet that we looked at. This is a very basic workflow, and we'll just call it webinar demo, and we'll process it. And what's happening now are all those handoffs that used to be, here's my list of people. In a couple of seconds, so I think it takes about 1.9 seconds typically, depending on server load. But here's where, to each of these different locations, these individuals might go. How many total miles is a group? How many people are within 50 miles of that location? How many total miles? What's the average miles that the group we picked? We picked a group very north in Dallas for this example. What's the fuel cost? What's the tons of CO2? And when you get out 6 decimal points to the right, clearly this is analyst output. But we can format these tables however precisely. There's all kinds of different data that we can put in. We actually could put, around each location. With Alteryx, you actually have all the spatial data sets of Experian consumer information or D&D business information. We could tell you around each location how many coffee shops are within a mile. If somehow that's part of your criteria, we could tell you what those coffee shops are and how many employees are estimated are working there to make sure that you can get through the line quickly. There's just so much data underneath that you can explore with Alteryx. You could download it in CSV format, but what I wanted to do is come back, and in that time, we just go and refresh and reconnect back into this dashboard. I'll relaunch it, and the ability to come in and see, here's my initial data. I had a scenario populated that was scattered across the city. Again, another great use of the Synagon tools. And then here is the demo that we just did. We just processed this set of employees that are up in the north part of Dallas, and we can look in that same poorly formatted comparison. Here it is. The second location is going to put a cost burden. This is actually much like Yahoo did last year, bringing employees from home back into work is what's being modeled. But what you have in this case is an end user coming into a gallery. So our customers would log in, they pick the workflow, they would have that spreadsheet of 150 people. They would upload it, process it. They could take down file output, or they could come in and, like before, have the ability to compare, the ability to see what headcounts impacted, what organizations, and like before, the same kind of interactivity of map-based selections of who is it that's off to the east in this, what are those groups, or we close out of the ad hoc selectors and come in and look, we can come in, and again, now the other thing is not just about distance, it's translating into what's the cost per associate, what's the sustainability, what's the carbon footprint impact of bringing these people back into various buildings. And so the ability to take this information and now compress a cycle time that most of our clients feel 1 week to 2 weeks is the norm to get the paper output, just tables and charts in a PowerPoint. Now to make it live, make it available within 2 seconds, make it available as data, make it available as a dashboard. When you bring all that together, I would say it's the most fundamental change to the quality of service we offer, going all the way back to 2011 when we first went to hosted BI platform and offered on-demand connected databases through dashboards. So as a last piece of this, just to close out and appreciate that rather than those handouts, here's actually the script that was built that ran in 1.9 seconds, and it basically allowed us to do inputs of upload a file, pick a market. Frankly, it could have recognized the associates that picked its own market. Probably be an improvement we'll make on our end. Enter a name, we called it webinar demo. And after that, it actually, in that 1.9 seconds, hit the back-end database 4 different times, brought back information, did the joins, did the field appendage, did the formatting of data, and stored it in the background, made it available as a data set to be downloaded or consumed. That was the CSV file that's produced. And then also bring it back and store it in the database in a few different tables. And those tables are specifically formatted, in our case, to create that dashboard. So in that 1.9 seconds, it grabbed data, took the spreadsheet, merged it, processed it, and stored it to be consumed either as data or a dashboard. It's remarkable. And now, our clients do. And so the final slide that we have here, how does this change? When I talk about being a game changer, we realize it's faster. There's less manual effort. Whenever you get the less manual effort, there's less chance for error. It expands the inputs. I talked about coffee shops. If you went out and looked at the Alteryx data that's available to append spatially, it is remarkable. If you did a full demo, we did a full demo of just that. The output is much more compelling than just a map, a picture map, and an associated table. You saw that in the presentation. And how do we go across and look in our end user base for where this could be deployed, rather than putting an analyst as a person? Where can we build these workflows? Things obviously have a high business impact. Things that are repeatedly done, like the justification for business cases that get repeated. High number of handoffs is an excellent place because those always create delays and stress. Large number of data sources because our ability to integrate all that in the back end to these workflows. And then where there's missing or ignored data sets, such as demographics or business profiles, that we can add in and make the decisions richer because the data sets are available. So with that I'll close. I appreciate everyone being with us for this time.